Every night he would call me to sit on his lap in front of my mother. "Come give Daddy a little kiss," he'd say with a smile. But beneath that lie was a blade cutting me. For many years I bled in silence, until I grabbed a hammer and crushed. "Hi, my dear ones. How are you all doing? I hope you're well, healthy, and with peace in your hearts. My name is Lucy Evangeline Santos. I'm 72 years old, and I've been living here in Maryville, Tennessee, for over 50 years now. I was born in a tiny little town called Pineville, also here in Tennessee, but I came to Maryville as a young woman and made my whole life here. Here at my house, it's a simple but cozy corner. I have my little flower pots on the porch, my favorite chair where I spend my afternoons, and a small coffee table where I always keep my embroidery and threads organized by color. The smell of fresh coffee comes from the kitchen, where my daughter-in-law Frances always leaves the pot ready for me. My grandkids come here almost every day after school, and they love watching Grandma work. The little one, Mary, who's 6 years old, always wants to learn, picks up the blunt needle I gave her, and tries to make little stitches on a scrap of fabric. And before I continue my story, I wanted to make a special request to you who are watching. Tell me here in the comments, from which little town are you watching Grandma's video? And what time of day did you find it? Early in the morning having coffee, after lunch taking a little rest, or in the late afternoon when the day is ending? I always read all the comments, you know, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and what time of day you take a moment to listen to this Grandma's stories from Maryville. Tell me, will you, my dears? Let's make a chain of affection, each one saying where they're watching from. And if you can, click that little button down there to subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, and the bell too, so you don't miss any of my stories. You'll really enjoy the others I have to tell. But today, my children, I want to share with you a very difficult story from my life. Something that happened to me when I was very young, something that marked me deeply, and that for many years I couldn't even talk about. It's a story about how sometimes the people who should take care of us can hurt us, and how we can find strength to defend ourselves, even as children. It's not an easy story to tell, no, but I feel I need to share this with you because maybe someone listening is going through something similar, or knows someone who is. And I want you to know that always, always there is a way out. There is always hope. So settle in there, get yourself a cup of coffee, and let's together remember this time in my life that changed everything. My dear ones, I'm going to take you now to my childhood in Pineville, a very small town in the Tennessee mountains. I was born in 1953, in a time very different from today. My father's name was Samuel Evangeline, a hard-working man who took care of a small property with some cattle and an apple orchard. My mother, Mary Ann, was a sweet woman, petite, who always had a smile on her face and the smell of lavender soap on her hands. We were 4 siblings, me, the youngest, my brother Edward, 3 years older, my sister Catherine, who was 5 years older than me, and the eldest, David, who was 7 years older. Our house was wooden, painted white with blue trim. It had 3 rooms, 1 bedroom where my parents slept, another where the 4 of us slept together, Catherine and I in 1 bed, the boys in another, and the living room that was also the kitchen. The backyard was big, with an oak tree that gave nice shade, an apple tree, and some chickens my mother raised. My father Samuel was a quiet man, worked hard and always came home tired, but never failed to give each of us a kiss on the forehead before dinner. He had big, calloused hands that smelled of leather and work sweat. Every morning, before the rooster crowed, he was already up, drinking his black coffee and leaving for work. My mother, Mary Ann, woke up with him, prepared his lunchbox to take, and always stood at the front window, waving until he disappeared down the dirt road. The routine at home was as regular as clockwork. I woke up to the sound of the chickens and the smell of coffee my mother made on the wood stove. After breakfast, coffee with milk, biscuits with butter, or sometimes a piece of cornbread, I helped my mother sweep the yard and feed the animals. Catherine took care of washing the breakfast dishes and making the beds, while the boys went to help my father when they didn't have school. Oh, my children, how I loved playing. With the neighborhood girls, we played house under the oak tree, making pretend food with mud and leaves. We invented pots from old cans my mother gave us and made pretend food with sand and flower petals. Eliza, the daughter of Mr. Charlie from the general store, was my best friend. She had blonde curls that bounced when she ran and always invented the most fun games. When it rained, which wasn't very often in those parts, we stayed on the porch watching the water fall and listening to the sound on the leaves. My mother sat with us and told stories about Paul Bunyan, Bigfoot, and the Headless Horseman. I was mesmerized by those stories, imagining the characters running through the mountains. At school, which was on the other side of the church square, I was a good student. The teacher, Miss Rachel, a thin lady who always wore a navy blue dress and her hair in a bun, always praised me for reading well and doing my arithmetic without mistakes. I really liked English, writing beautiful words neatly in my notebook. But when I was about 6 years old, something happened that changed our whole family. My father Samuel had a heart problem, a heart attack, as they called it back then. It was on a Saturday morning. He was milking the cow when suddenly he fell to the ground, hand on his chest, moaning softly. My mother ran out screaming for help. The neighbors came, carried him to the Pineville hospital, but by the time they got there, he had already gone to be with the Lord. I remember the day of the funeral like it was yesterday. My mother dressed in black, crying softly, holding my small hand. The cemetery full of people from the whole town, because my father was very beloved. I didn't really understand what was happening. I just knew that Daddy wasn't going to come home anymore, wasn't going to give me a goodnight kiss anymore, wasn't going to come home tired from work asking Mom to warm up dinner. After my father died, our life became very difficult. My mother didn't know how we were going to manage without his income. The small property he took care of belonged to a regional landowner, so we no longer had the right to stay there. David, who was already 15, tried to find work, but it was hard for such a young boy. That's when my mother met Victor. He appeared in our lives about 6 months after Daddy's death. He was a tall, strong man with a graying mustache who worked making furniture and fixing wooden things for the whole town. He always walked with his pants pockets full of small tools, hammer, screwdrivers, pliers, pocket knives. When he walked, you could hear the little sound of metal clinking inside his pockets. Victor started frequenting our house, always bringing something: a piece of meat, some candy for the children, pretty fabrics for my mother to make dresses. He spoke softly with her on the porch when he thought we weren't watching. My mother smiled in a way I hadn't seen since before Daddy died. I was small, only 7 years old when they started dating, but something about that man gave me a cold feeling in my stomach. Maybe it was the way he looked at me when my mother wasn't watching, a look that seemed to be measuring something, calculating. But I was a child. I didn't know how to name that strange sensation that made me want to run and hide behind Mama's skirt. My dear ones, it was in January 1961, when I was 8 years old, that my mother and Victor got married. I remember the day like it was yesterday. My mother wore a light blue dress she had sewn herself with a little white flower in her hair. Victor was in a dark suit, with that mustache well combed and a smile showing all his teeth. The ceremony was simple, at the main church in Pineville, with few guests, some neighbors, my Uncle Michael, Mama's brother, and us 4 children. After the wedding, Victor moved into our house. He brought some bundles of clothes, a big box full of carpentry tools, and some furniture he had made himself: a round table of dark wood and 2 new chairs for the living room. My mother was so happy with those pretty pieces of furniture. She dusted them every day, as if they were treasures. In the first few days, Victor established the house rules. He said that now we were a real family, and that there had to be order and discipline. Meals had to be on time, the house had to always be clean, and we children couldn't make noise when he came home tired from work. My mother agreed with everything, happy to have a man to take care of the family again. But it was after about 2 months that the routine that terrorized me every night began. Victor instituted what he called family time. Every day after dinner, we gathered in the living room. He sat in his new chair, my mother sat on the sofa sewing or mending clothes, and we children played quietly on the floor or did our school homework. It looked like a normal scene of a happy family, right, my children? But it wasn't. When it was around 8 o'clock at night, Victor would clap his hands and say, "All right, children, time to say goodnight to Daddy before going to bed." My older brothers, David and Edward, were already too old for these things, so they just said, "Good night, Mr. Me." Victor from a distance, and went to their room. Catherine, who was 13, gave him a quick kiss on the forehead and ran off. But me? Oh, my dear ones, with me it was different. "Come here, Lucy," he'd say, opening his arms and patting his leg. "Come give Daddy a nice big hug." The first few times I thought it was normal. After all, my real father always gave me a goodnight kiss. But when I got close to Victor and he pulled me onto his lap, oh, Jesus, how it hurt! Whenever I sat on his lap, I felt something hard, pointy, poking me in the leg or bottom. It was a sharp pain, as if something was piercing me through my clothes. I'd move around, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. But Victor held me firm by the shoulders and said, "Stay still, daughter. Daddy just wants a loving hug." And the worst part is that he did this smiling at my mother, who looked up from her sewing and smiled back, thinking it was the sweetest thing in the world. "Look how sweet," she'd say. "Victor is such a loving father to Lucy." I tried to complain, said quietly, "It hurts, Mr. Victor." But he squeezed my shoulders harder and whispered in my ear, "Don't be rude, girl. Daddy's just showing affection. Well-behaved girls don't complain about affection." And out loud for my mother to hear, he'd say, "Lucy's just shy. Right, sweetheart? No need to be shy with Daddy." My mother always agreed. "That's right, Lucy. Don't be difficult with your stepfather. He loves you like you're his own daughter." The pain was so great that I held back tears with all my strength. Sometimes, when Victor pressed me against him in that hug, I felt something wet on my clothes, and later discovered I was bleeding. Little tiny holes in the skin of my thigh, red stains on my slip. I hid the dirty clothes at the bottom of the basket, afraid my mother would ask what had happened. After a few weeks in this routine, I began to understand that something was wrong. One morning, when Victor left for work, I saw him organizing his tools on the living room table before putting them in the box. And that's when I realized he chose a specific tool and put it in his front pants pocket. Sometimes it was a closed pocket knife, but with the point facing up. Sometimes it was a small screwdriver or a pointed piece of iron he used to drill wood. I was just an 8-year-old child, but I began to understand that Victor did this on purpose. He prepared his lap to hurt me. That wasn't a tool that had been forgotten in the pocket. It was a planned, calculated trap. From then on, every time it was time for "Good night to Daddy," my heart raced. I looked at him sitting in the chair, smiling, and knew that beneath that smile was a blade waiting to pierce me. I tried to make excuses. "I have a stomachache, I'm sleepy, I just want to say good night from here." But my mother always interfered. "Don't be rude, Lucy. Go give your stepfather a hug." And Victor completed with that syrupy voice, "Come, daughter, Daddy worked all day thinking about my little girl's hug." What made me most desperate was seeing my mother so happy, so in love with that man. She smiled when he came home, prepared the food he liked most, arranged his clothes so carefully. How could I tell her that the man she loved hurt me every night? How could an 8-year-old child explain something so strange, so hard to believe? I tried once. One morning when we were alone in the kitchen, I spoke softly. "Mom, when I sit on Mr. Victor's lap, he has something in his pocket that hurts me." My mother stopped stirring the beans and looked at me confused. "What do you mean, child?" "There's something hard that pokes, that pierces my leg." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Oh, it must be his tools, right? You know how Victor works so much. Sometimes he forgets little things in his pocket. Next time you tell him, he'll take them out. But I knew he didn't forget. I had seen him putting them in on purpose. When I tried to explain better, my mother shook her head. Lucy, girl, you're inventing evil where there isn't any. Victor is a good man who takes care of us. Don't make a fuss over nothing. That's when I understood I was alone in this. That nobody was going to believe an 8-year-old child telling such a strange story. And that every night, after dinner, I was going to have to face that torture chair that Victor had turned his own lap into. The weeks passed, and the physical pain added to the fear. I couldn't play properly during the day anymore. I kept thinking about when he was going to come home. When I heard the little sound of the tools in his pocket approaching, my stomach churned. At school, the teacher, Miss Rachel, noticed I was quieter, more distracted, but when she asked if I was okay, I just shook my head and said yes. My dear ones, the years that followed were the most difficult of my life. From 1961 until 1968, from age 8 to 15, I lived that nightmare every night. Victor perfected his cruelty in a way that still gives me chills to remember. He started varying the tools he put in his pocket as if testing which caused the most pain. Some nights it was a thick nail with the point facing up. Other times it was an iron file with rough edges, or even small pieces of glass he wrapped in thin cloth. The glass was the worst of all. It cut the skin even through clothes, leaving little red scratches on my legs that burned for days. As time went by, Victor became more confident, bolder. He prolonged those hugs that before lasted only a few seconds. Now he held me on his lap for 5-10 minutes, pretending to be talking with my mother about his workday, about the furniture he'd made, about the neighbors. And I was there, trying not to move, feeling the pain grow with each minute, sometimes biting my tongue until it bled so I wouldn't scream. "My, how Lucy has grown," he'd say to my mother, pressing me harder against the cutting object. "She's almost a young lady, isn't she, Mary Ann? But she's still Daddy's little girl, right, daughter?" And he'd rock me gently on his lap, making the tool press even harder against my skin. My mother would smile, thinking it was the height of affection. "It's true she's growing too fast, but she'll always be our baby, right, Lucy?" I had to agree, had to smile, had to pretend I was enjoying it, while I felt my clothes getting wet with my own blood. Victor also started making strange comments during those moments. He'd whisper in my ear things like, "Daddy needs to teach his daughter discipline, right? Obedient girls don't complain about anything." Or, "If you're a good girl and stay quiet, Daddy will be more affectionate." And the word affectionate in his mouth always came with a harder pressure from the tool against me. Sometimes, when the object in his pocket managed to hurt me deeper, I couldn't hold back a little moan of pain. In those moments, Victor quickly spoke loudly to my mother. "Lucy's getting sleepy, right, daughter? Daddy knows when his daughter is tired." And my mother, without looking up from her sewing, would respond, "Yes, she works so hard at school, poor thing. Take her to her room, Victor." But he never took me to the room immediately. First, he stayed a few more minutes torturing me, whispering, "See? Not even your own mother cares if you're suffering. Only Daddy knows how to take care of you properly." The isolation I felt was terrible, my children. My older siblings already had their own concerns. David, who was 19, had found work on a farm and was almost never home. Edward, at 18, spent the whole day helping Victor in the carpentry shop and came home dead tired. Catherine, who was already a young woman of 20, was always dating a boy from town and thinking about marriage. Nobody paid attention to the quiet girl I had become. At school, my grades started to drop because I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about when I was going to get home, about dinner time, about good night to Daddy time. Miss Rachel asked a few times if I was okay, if there was any problem at home. But how could I explain something so strange, so impossible to believe? The marks on my body accumulated over the years. Small scars on my thigh, little scratches on my legs, purple bruises I hid with long skirts. My mother never asked about these marks, maybe because I always managed to hide them well. Or maybe because she was so happy with her new life that she didn't want to see anything that could disturb her. Victor also started giving me special gifts. Sometimes after a night when he had hurt me more than usual, he appeared the next day with candy, fruit, or a ribbon for my hair. For Daddy to show how much he loves his little daughter, he'd say in front of my mother. Well-behaved girls deserve treats. These gifts made me feel even worse because they seemed like payment for my silence, compensation for the pain he caused me. And worst of all, my mother melted. "Look what a loving stepfather you have, Lucy. Thank Mr. Victor properly." When I turned 12 in 1965, I thought maybe things would change. After all, I was already bigger, I was becoming a young lady. But Victor only intensified the torture. On the night of my birthday, after we ate the cake my mother had made, he called me to his lap and whispered, "Now that you're 12, Daddy's going to teach you some new lessons." That night, he had put 2 nails in his pocket, one on each side of his leg, so that when I sat down, I was squeezed between them. The pain was so great that I fainted on his lap. When I woke up, I was in my room, with my mother putting cold water on my forehead. "Poor thing, must have eaten too much cake," she said. Victor was at the bedroom door, with a little smile at the corner of his mouth, and said, "Yeah, children don't know how to control themselves." But it was good for her to learn. My mother thought he was talking about eating too much sweets. I knew he was talking about learning to endure pain. The years 1966, 1967 passed in the same cruel routine. I became thinner, quieter, more haunted. At school, the other girls played and laughed, and I stayed in a corner, always worried about when I had to go home. Some tried to approach me, invite me to play, but I couldn't have fun knowing what awaited me every night. Victor noticed my isolation and used it to his advantage. "See, Marianne? Lucy doesn't have friends because she's special. She prefers to stay home with family. That's why Daddy likes her so much." And my mother agreed. "That's right, she's always been more of a homebody." Homebody nothing. I was a prisoner of my own fear. In 1967, when I was 14, I tried once more to talk to my mother. This time I was more direct. "Mom, I don't want to say goodnight to Mr. Victor anymore. Can it just be from far away?" She stopped peeling potatoes and looked at me seriously. "Lucy, what's this all about? You're acting very strange lately. Victor is your stepfather. He loves you like a daughter, and you come with these mannerisms? This is ingratitude." I still tried. "But Mom, I don't like when he what, girl?" "When he squeezes me too hard." My mother sighed, impatient. "Lucy, for the love of God, the man works all day to support this family, comes home wanting affection from his daughter, and you come with nonsense? I don't want to hear any more of this foolishness, you hear? And I don't want you being rude to your stepfather." That's when I definitively understood I was completely alone, that I could scream, could cry, could bleed, but nobody was going to save me from that situation. My own mother had chosen his side. And that's how I reached 15 years old, in 1968, completely broken inside, but also with a rage growing in my chest. A rage that was going to explode in a way I didn't even imagine. My dear ones, we now come to the most difficult moment of my story, but also the most important. It was October 1968. I had just turned 15 a few days ago, and something inside me was different. 7 years of torture had transformed me into a broken girl, but had also planted a seed of hatred that was growing like a weed in my chest. At that time, I was already a young woman, my body had changed, and Victor had noticed. His comments during the hugs became more disgusting, more invasive. He whispered things like, "Look how my girl is becoming a woman. Daddy's going to have to teach some new lessons now." And the way he looked at me when my mother wasn't watching had changed too. It was a longer, more calculating look that made me feel naked, even though I was dressed. On the night of October 15th, 1968, a date I'll never forget, something happened that was the last straw. Victor had been drinking some whiskey with some friends during the afternoon, celebrating I don't know what, and came home more talkative, looser than usual. During dinner, he was telling some funny stories, making my mother laugh, and I thought that maybe, just maybe, he'd forget the disgusting routine that night. But he didn't forget. When 8 o'clock came, he clapped his hands as always. "All right, family. Time for Lucy to say goodnight to Daddy." But this time, when I approached with that tightness in my heart as always, he pulled me harder than usual. And when I sat on his lap, the pain was different. It wasn't just one pointed tool like always. It was like he had put several cutting things in his pocket, forming a row of needles. The pain was so intense, I couldn't hold back a little scream. Victor squeezed me harder and whispered in my ear with that breath of whiskey. "Quiet, girl. Daddy put a special surprise today in honor of your birthday. You're already a young lady. You have to learn to bear a woman's pain." I tried to get up, but he held me by the wrists, forcing me to stay seated in that torture. And that's when he said the words that changed everything. "You know, Mary Ann," he said to my mother, still holding me firm, "Lucy's getting so pretty that any day now she'll get a boyfriend. But as long as she lives in our house, Daddy's in charge, right? Daddy decides what's best for her." The tone of possession in his voice, the way he said, "Daddy's in charge," while hurting me, made me understand something terrible. This was never going to end. Even when I grew up, even when I became an adult, as long as I lived in that house, Victor was going to continue torturing me. And maybe it would even get worse. That night, when I finally got to my room, I cried like I had never cried. It wasn't just tears of physical pain anymore. It was pure despair. I felt like I was sinking into a dark hole and nobody was going to pull me out. I looked at the little mirror on the bedroom wall and didn't recognize the girl looking back at me. It was a thin creature, haunted, with deep dark circles and an empty gaze. It was that night that I first thought about killing myself. The idea came as a strange relief. If I didn't exist anymore, the pain would stop. If I disappeared, Victor couldn't hurt me anymore. I spent hours lying in bed, imagining ways to do it, and the more I thought about it, the more the idea seemed to make sense. But then I remembered my real father, Samuel. I remembered how he always said I was strong, that I was special, that I was going to grow up and be a brave woman. And something inside me screamed, "No, you're not going to let this bastard win. You're not going to die because of him." The next morning, when I woke up, there was a strange determination in my chest. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew I wasn't going to endure even one more night of that. I observed Victor during breakfast, saw him organizing his tools on the table before leaving for work, and for the first time, instead of fear, I felt a cold and calculating rage. He was just a man, a cowardly man who tortured a child, and I was no longer a defenseless child. I was a 15-year-old young woman who had endured 7 years of hell and was still standing. I spent the whole day thinking, planning. When Victor came back from work that afternoon, I was different, more alert, more attentive. I observed his every move, every gesture, every word. During dinner, when he talked about his workday, I was studying him like he was prey. "Lucy, you're very quiet today," my mother commented. "Are you feeling okay?" "Yes, Mom," I answered, but my voice came out different, firmer, more decided. Victor looked at me with that cruel little smile and said, "She must be thinking about Daddy's hug tonight. Right, daughter?" For years, that phrase made me tremble with fear. But that night, when he said it, I looked directly into his eyes and responded, "Yes, Mr. Victor, I'm thinking about it too." The tone of my voice must have been strange because he frowned for a second. But then he smiled again and said, "Ah, good. Daddy's thinking about it too." After dinner, when the fateful time came, I saw Victor going to the bathroom before sitting in his chair. It was always like this. He went to the bathroom to adjust the tools in his pocket, prepare his torture trap. That night, when he came out of the bathroom with that devilish little smile, I knew he had prepared something even worse than the day before. He sat in the chair, adjusted his legs, and clapped, "Come, Lucy, Daddy's waiting." My mother was sewing on the sofa, concentrated on a hem with no idea what was going to happen. I got up slowly, felt my legs trembling, not from fear, but from a strange, powerful energy. I walked toward him, and for the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel like running. When I was almost close to his chair, something happened that changed everything. Victor had been drinking again that afternoon and was feeling too confident. He said out loud, for my mother to hear, "Mary Ann, look at this. I'm going to teach our Lucy how to sit properly on Daddy's lap. She's becoming a young lady, needs to learn to behave like a woman." And then he did something he had never done before. He showed my mother what he had in his pocket. He pulled out a pointed piece of iron, kind of rusty, and said, "Oh, I left this here by mistake. Lucky our girl is well behaved and never complains about anything, right?" My mother looked, gave a little laugh, and said, "Oh, Victor, you're so absent-minded. Put that away, it'll hurt the girl." "Ah, it doesn't hurt," he replied, putting it back in his pocket with a devilish smile. "Our Lucy's already used to it, right, daughter?" It was at that moment that something inside me exploded. 7 years of silence, 7 years of pain, 7 years watching my mother defend him without knowing the truth. She had just seen proof of his cruelty and still treated it like it was an accident. I looked around the living room and saw, leaning against the wall, the toolbox Victor had left open after work. And there, shining in the dim lamplight, was a big, heavy hammer with a wooden handle. In that split second, everything became clear in my mind. 7 years of hell were going to end that night, one way or another. My dear ones, what happened in those next few minutes changed my life forever. While Victor was sitting in his chair, adjusting his posture and waiting for me with that devilish smile, I walked to the toolbox. My mother continued sewing, oblivious to everything, and Victor was so confident, so sure I was going to be the same submissive girl as always, that he didn't even pay attention to what I was doing. "Come on, Lucy," he said, patting his leg where I knew another pain trap was hidden. "Daddy doesn't have all night. Tomorrow I have to wake up early for work." I picked up the hammer with both hands. It was heavier than I imagined, with the rough wooden handle full of splinters and the cold iron head reflecting the dim lamplight. I felt its weight, the solidity, the power that tool represented. For the first time in 7 years, I had in my hands something that could cause pain instead of receiving it. "Coming, Mr. Victor," I replied, hiding the hammer behind my back. My voice came out strangely calm, almost sweet, as if I were the same obedient girl as always. "Just fixing something here first." He laughed, a low and cruel laugh I had heard 1,000 times before. "What's this, girl? Don't be shy with Daddy. You're already a young lady. You don't need to have these silly hesitations anymore. Come here and he'll teach you how to sit properly on his lap." Those words, "already a young lady," made me remember all the disgusting comments he had made in recent weeks. How he looked at my changing body, how he whispered in my ear about new lessons he was going to teach me. I felt the rage rise up my throat like bitter bile. I walked toward him, slowly, feeling my heart beating so hard it seemed like it was going to explode in my chest. But it wasn't fear. It was a mixture of pure rage, determination, and something I had never felt before, the feeling that I was going to take control of my own life. Each step I took toward that cursed chair was a step toward my freedom. Victor watched me approach with those small, cruel eyes, already savoring in advance the pain he was going to cause me. He had the habit of adjusting his body position when I got close, positioning the tool in a way that would hurt me even more. And that's exactly what he did. He moved in the chair, adjusted his legs, prepared his diabolic trap. "Ready," he said, opening his arms with that fake smile stamped on his face. "Now sit here on Daddy's lap, and he'll give you a nice tight hug. But today it's going to be special, okay? Daddy prepared a surprise to celebrate you becoming a young lady." And it was at that moment, my children, that 7 years of silence, 7 years of pain, 7 years of humiliation, 7 years of sleepless nights in fear, 7 years of clothes stained with blood, 7 years of scars on soul and body exploded inside me like a volcano that had been dormant too long. Instead of sitting on his lap, I spun my body with all the strength I had accumulated in these 15 years of life and struck a brutal blow with the hammer exactly where I knew the pointed iron was, right in the middle of his right thigh. I put in that blow all the pain I had felt, all the rage I had swallowed, all the hatred that had grown in my chest during those years of hell. The sound was terrible and satisfying at the same time. The metallic sound of the hammer crushing the tool against the bone of his leg, mixed with the dry crack that I knew was the bone breaking, followed by a scream that must have woken up the whole neighborhood and made all the dogs on the entire street bark in fright. Ah! Victor howled like a pig being slaughtered, writhing in the chair and almost falling to the floor. My God! My leg! Help! Mary Ann! Help! Blood began to run from under his pants, forming a red puddle on the dirt floor. He tried to hold his leg with both hands, but the pain was so great he couldn't even touch the spot. My mother dropped her sewing on the floor and jumped from the sofa, as if she'd been shocked, with her eyes wide with terror. Lucy! What did you do, girl? Have you gone crazy? Drop that hammer! But I didn't drop it. I held it even tighter with both hands and shouted back with a voice I didn't even know existed inside me. Look at his pocket, Mom! Look at what he uses to hurt me every night! Go there and look! Victor was thrashing in the chair, moaning like a wounded animal, but managed to speak between screams of pain. The girl's gone crazy! Mary Ann, she attacked me out of nowhere. Call someone! Call the doctor! I think she broke my bone! Out of nowhere! I screamed again, raising the hammer and threatening to strike another blow. 7 years, Mom. 7 years this bastard has tortured me every single night. Look at his pocket. Go there and look now. My mother was in total panic, running from one side of the living room to the other, not knowing whether to help Victor or try to understand what I was screaming. Lucy, for the love of God, drop that hammer. You hurt your stepfather. What's gotten into you, girl? I'm not dropping anything, I yelled, with a force that seemed to come from deep in the earth. And if he tries to get up from that cursed chair, I'll break the other leg too, and then his arms. Victor looked at me with a terror I had never ever seen in his eyes. It was the first time in my life he was afraid of me. The first time the power was on my side, and my God, how good it felt. Mary Ann, he moaned, his voice choked with pain. Call someone, please. I think the girl really broke my bone. It hurts so much. I can't move my leg. Mom! I shouted, pointing the hammer in the direction of his pants pocket. Go there and take out what he has in his pocket. Go now. I want you to see with your own eyes the tool he uses to cut me. Trembling from head to toe, my mother began to approach Victor, who tried to stop her with his free hand. No, Mary Ann, leave that for later. First take me to the hospital. I could die if I lose too much blood. No! I advanced toward him with the hammer raised. She's going to look now! Now! 7 years I endured your cursed tools cutting me, piercing me, making me bleed. Now it's your turn to bleed, you bastard! That's when Victor, perhaps because of the unbearable pain, perhaps because of the desperation of seeing he had completely lost control of the situation, made the final mistake of his life. He shouted, Stop this, you ungrateful brat! After everything I did for you all, I took you out of poverty, supported this house, took care of all of you, and this is how you thank me? Everything you did for us? The rage that came out of my voice at that moment must have cracked the walls of the house and scared even the angels in heaven. You call torture a favor? You call 7 years of suffering care? My mother, finally, stuck her trembling hand into his pants pocket. When she pulled out that rusty piece of iron, long, pointed like a spear, stained with dried blood, my blood, her face changed completely. She turned white as a washed sheet and began to tremble so much she almost dropped the tool. Victor, she whispered, looking at the iron and then at him, then at the blood on the floor, then at me. What? What is this? Why do you have this in your pocket? He still tried to lie, even with his broken leg, even with the proof in her hand. Oh, that's just a work tool I forgot. You know how absent-minded I am with tools. Always forget something in my pocket. Absent-minded? I shouted, and my voice echoed through the whole house. Tell her the truth. Tell her how you put this in on purpose to hurt me. Tell her how you felt pleasure seeing me bleed on your lap. And that's when Victor, maybe because the pain in his leg was unbearable, maybe because he knew he'd been discovered and there was no way to lie anymore, made the confession I had been waiting for 7 long and painful years. All right. I did it on purpose, yes. The girl was too spoiled, too mouthy, needed to learn discipline, needed to know who was in charge of this house. And you never cared about anything anyway, Marianne, always defending her, thinking I was a saint, never paid attention to what was happening in your own house. The silence that fell in the living room after those words was deafening. All you could hear was the sound of his heavy breathing, the drops of blood falling on the floor, and the wind shaking the tiles outside. My mother stood like a statue, holding that piece of iron as if it were proof of all the mistakes of her life, and I, finally, for the first time in 7 years, felt free. 7 years, Mom, I said, quieter now, but still holding the hammer firmly. 7 years he hurt me every night, and I tried to tell you. Remember when I said it hurt? Remember when I asked not to sit on his lap anymore? You said I was rude, that I was inventing evil where there wasn't any. Tears began to run down my mother's face like 2 waterfalls. Lucy, my daughter, I didn't know. How could I imagine such a thing? How can a mother imagine that? You didn't want to know, I replied, and those words carried the weight of all those years of abandonment. Every time I tried to speak, you told me to be quiet. Every time I cried, you said it was nonsense. You chose him, Mom. You always chose him instead of your own daughter. Victor continued moaning in the chair, trying to stop the blood flowing from his broken leg, making a terrible mess on the floor. Mary Ann, for the love of God, take me to the hospital. I could die here. It hurts so much. My mother looked at him, then at me, then at the bloodied iron in her hands. And for the first time in my life, for the first time in 15 years, I saw her choose my side. No. First, you're going to explain exactly what you did to my daughter. Each night, each wound, each tear you caused. I want to know everything. You hear? Everything. I have nothing more to explain, he murmured, but he no longer had that arrogance from before. His voice came out weak, defeated. Just take me to the doctor, please. That's when I spoke the words I had kept stuck in my throat for years. If you don't tell her everything now, Mr. Victor, I'm going to break your other leg too, and then your arms. And then I'll continue until you feel every stab of pain, every drop of blood, every tear that I shed in these 7 years of hell. The pure fear in his eyes gave me a satisfaction I never imagined could exist. That man who had terrorized me for so long, who had turned my childhood into a nightmare, was terrified of a 15-year-old girl holding a hammer. And then, between moans of pain and tears of terror, Victor began to tell everything. Each tool he specifically chose to hurt me. Each night he enjoyed seeing my suffering. Each time he felt sadistic pleasure with my pain. Each drop of blood he made flow from my body. Each scar he left on my soul. My mother cried as she listened to each word, holding that piece of iron as if it were material proof of her failure as a mother. When he finished confessing all his crimes, the house fell silent again. All you could hear was the sound of the rain that had started to fall outside, drumming on the roof as if heaven itself were crying, and his low moans. Now, I said, still holding the hammer like it was a royal scepter, you're going to leave this house tonight and never come back. And if I hear that you laid a finger on a child, if I hear that you did to any girl what you did to me, I'll come after you and finish what I started today. That was the last night Victor slept in our house, and the first night in 7 years that I slept in peace, knowing I would never have to sit in that cursed chair again. My dear ones, look where life has brought me after all that. Today, at 72 years old, here in Maryville, Tennessee, I have a life I never imagined would be possible that terrible night in October 1968. When I broke that evil man's leg and he left our house never to return, I had no idea I was opening the door to a whole life of peace and happiness. After Victor left, my mother herself helped him out, said that if he tried to come back, she herself would call the police. Our life changed completely. The first few months were difficult, I won't lie to you. My mother cried a lot, blaming herself for not having noticed what was happening. She always repeated, "How was I so blind, Lucy? How can a mother be so blind?" But I had already forgiven her, you know, because when the truth appeared, she chose to stay on my side, and that meant the world to me. In 1970, when I was 17, I met the man of my life, Raymond Peter Santos. Oh, my children, what a handsome and hard-working young man. He was 3 years older than me, son of a family of farmers from a neighboring town, and had come to Pineville to work on a cotton farm. Black hair, light eyes, always with a smile on his face, and a kind word for everyone. The first time Raymond saw me, I was at the town general store buying thread for my mother, who had taught me to sew to help support the house. He approached all awkward and said, "Miss, do you know where Mr. Michael's house is, who sells tools?" When I answered, he kept looking at me in such a sweet, respectful way that my heart raced. But it wasn't fear like before. It was pure joy. We dated for 3 years, always with great respect, lots of good conversation. Raymond knew I had been through difficult things in childhood. I told him about Victor, of course, and he never pressured me, never rushed me. "Lucy," he'd say, "you set the pace of our relationship. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to feel safe with me." And look, my dear ones, how different it is when a real man loves you. He made me feel protected, respected, loved in a clean and beautiful way. We got married in March 1973 in a beautiful ceremony at the main church in Pineville, the same one where my mother had married Victor years before. But this time it was different. It was true love. It was a good man entering my life. I wore the dress I sewed myself, white with lace, and a veil that had been my grandmother's. Raymond looked handsome in a suit, borrowed from his older brother, and when the preacher asked if I accepted him as my husband, my voice came out firm and clear. "I do." Soon after the wedding, Raymond got a job at a transportation company here in Maryville. It was a good opportunity, and we decided to move here to start our new life in a bigger city. My mother was sad about the move, but understood it was for our good. "Go, my daughter," she said on the day of our departure. "Go be happy away from those bad memories. You deserve all the happiness in the world." We arrived in Maryville in April 1973 with 2 suitcases of clothes and lots of hope in our hearts. We rented a small house in the Everett neighborhood, near downtown. It was 3 simple rooms, but it was ours. Raymond worked as a driver, left early and came back in the late afternoon, always bringing some news from the street, always with a loving kiss for me. In 1975, God blessed me with the arrival of my first son, Frank. Oh, my dear ones, what immense joy when I held that little boy in my arms. Raymond cried with me at the hospital, saying, "Look at our gift from God, Lucy. We're going to raise him with lots of love." And we did. Frank grew up strong and healthy, an intelligent and obedient boy. 2 years later came my second blessing, Frances. I named her in honor of her brother. And in 1980 came the youngest, little Raymond, just like his father in stubbornness and affectionate ways. Our little house was getting small with 3 children, so Raymond managed to buy a lot in the neighborhood where we live today, and little by little we built our own house, brick by brick, with great sacrifice, but with great love. It was during the construction of the house that I began to dedicate myself more to embroidery. I needed to help with expenses, so I started making trousseaux for brides, table sets, christening towels. The neighbors liked my work so much that soon I had orders until I couldn't take any more. And I discovered that embroidering wasn't just work. It was therapy for my soul. Each stitch I made was as if I were sewing my own healing, you know? Raymond always supported me in everything. "You have a gift in your hands, woman," he'd say, watching me work on the porch after the children slept. "You turned simple cloth into a work of art." He installed a brighter lamp on the porch just so I could embroider at night, arranged a special little table to keep my threads organized by color. He never complained when I stayed up late working, never said I should stop doing this or that. The years passed so fast. My children grew up, studied, got married, gave me the most beautiful grandchildren in the world. Frank became a mechanic, has his own shop, and 2 children, John, 15 years old, and Maria, 12. Frances graduated as a teacher, married a very good young man, and gave me 3 granddaughters, little Mary, who you already know, 6 years old, Anne, 9, and Grace, 11. And my youngest Raymond works at a building materials store, has a small daughter, Lucy, yes, they named her in my honor, who's only 3 years old and is the cutest thing in this world. My dear Raymond left us 5 years ago, in 2020. It was his heart, like what happened with my father when I was a child. But what a beautiful life we had together. 47 years of happy marriage, companionship, true love. He died sleeping, without pain, in our bed, holding my hand. The next day, I found a little note he had left in the bedside table drawer. "Lucy, my love, thank you for making me the happiest man in the world. Take good care of our children and grandchildren. I love you forever." Today, I live here in this same house we built together, in the Sinha Saboya neighborhood. This is where we moved when the children grew up. It's a simple but cozy house, with the porch where I spend my afternoons embroidering, the little backyard where I have my plants, and many, many good memories. Frances, my daughter-in-law, who's married to Frank, has lived here with me since Raymond died. She takes care of me so lovingly, always has my coffee ready, makes those delicious foods I like. My grandchildren are the joy of my life. Almost every day at least one of them shows up here. Little Mary is the one who likes to stay with me the most, always wanting to learn to embroider, always asking questions about what life was like in the old days. John, the oldest, helps me with heavy things, fixes what breaks in the house. The other granddaughters always come on weekends, and we have a party in the kitchen, preparing cakes and sweets. My routine today is peaceful and blessed. I wake up early, have my coffee with biscuits that Frances prepares, and go to the porch with my embroidery. In the morning, the light is perfect for working, and the street activity keeps me company. After lunch, I take a little nap in my rocking chair, and in the afternoon, I return to embroidery or receive visits from the grandchildren. Sometimes, when I'm here alone embroidering, I remember that 15-year-old girl who grabbed a hammer to defend her own life. And I'm so proud of her. I'm proud of having had courage, of not having let myself be broken, of having fought for my freedom. All the pain was worth it, because it brought me here, to this life full of love and peace. My dear children who are listening to me, after telling you this whole story, my heart is full of many things I need to say. First, I want you to know that if I was able to share this great pain, it was because it became strength. It became courage. It became the certainty that nobody but nobody has the right to hurt a child. If there's someone out there watching this video who is going through something similar, or if you know a child who is being hurt by someone in the family, please don't stay silent like I did for 7 years. Seek the authorities in your area. Look for organizations that protect children. Talk to teachers, to trusted neighbors. In any country in the world, there are people ready to help. Silence only helps those who do evil. Look, during all these years that have passed since that night when I grabbed the hammer, I learned some very important things about life. I learned that pain, even the most terrible, can be transformed into wisdom. I learned that when we face our fears head-on, they lose power over us. I learned that even in the darkest moments of our life, there is always a spark of hope waiting to be lit. I learned that having courage doesn't mean not feeling fear. It means acting even while feeling fear. That night in October, I was terrified, but I did what had to be done. I learned that sometimes we need to break the things that break us, literally, to be able to free ourselves. I learned that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, but means choosing not to let anger poison the rest of our life. I learned that true love exists, yes, my children. After so much pain, God put Raymond in my path to show me that not every man is like that bastard. There are good men, men who protect, who love, who respect. I learned that real family is the one that stays by our side when the truth appears, like my mother did that night. And I learned mainly that our story doesn't need to be defined by the bad things that happen to us. I could have stayed trapped in that pain forever, could have let those 7 years of suffering define the rest of my life. But I chose differently. I chose to build a new life, a loving family, a home full of peace. Today, when I look at my hands embroidering, I remember they're the same hands that held that hammer. They're hands that knew violence, but chose to create beauty. They're hands that bled, but today only spread affection for my grandchildren. That's what I want you to understand. We can choose what to do with our pain. My dear ones, if you've come this far with me in this story, it's because you have a good heart and know how to recognize when someone needs to be heard. Now I need you for something very important. Subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Activate the notification bell, because stories like this need to be told. There need to be brave people to talk about these things that many people prefer to pretend don't exist. And do me a special favor, write there in the comments, just the word courage, like that, really big, if you watched until the end and understood Grandma's message. I want to see how many brave people are watching me, people who aren't afraid to hear the truth, no matter how painful it is. That word will be our secret code, okay? Only those who watched everything to hear will know why they have to write courage. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it with that person. Sometimes it's a word of encouragement that's missing for someone to take action and change their own life. Remember, dignity and respect are universal values, no matter where you are in the world. Together, as one big global family, we can protect those who need it most. Do this now. Don't wait another minute. Grandma Lucy will be here waiting for you to always come back to hear more stories. A big kiss to each of your hearts, and remember, you are stronger than you imagine.